All right, well, let's get started. I did have this meeting scheduled for an hour, but I moved it to an hour and a half just to make sure we didn't have any issues with Zoom and just going if we were over a few minutes in that case. Just wanted to just start with that. So good morning, everyone. Glad you can make it. Glad you're here. This is definitely a new format that I'm not used to, but in a sense of doing a webinar base. But I think in the sake of where we are as a society, it's definitely some conveniences and some nice pieces of that. So instead of doing one big training, I'm going to break up things based upon the time of year that we're in. So we're not going to cover everything all at once. So we're going to have segments of each segment of E-rate and the time of year that's relevant. So glad you guys can make it. I am recording this. I am going to eventually post this on our SDE's YouTube page, and I can send out a notification on that when that is ready to go as well, in case folks have missed it or if you need a refresher. But in any case, let's get started.
Okay.
All right, so just a quick overview of the agenda today. We're going to kind of just go over the program itself, where it came from, where it started, and then how E-rate and what it is and how it formulated. Talk about eligibility and what that means, and then what does E-rate pay for, and then of course probably the most important thing is how much money do you get out of this program. And we'll talk about some terminology aspects to main pieces of E-rate and terminology and what that means. And then we'll kind of briefly go over how to apply. We'll talk more about that process in more detail in upcoming webinars, but we'll give you just a kind of a glimpse of that part. And just kind of just a housekeeping kind of thing. If you have a question, feel free to interrupt me via just your voice if you want to just chime in, or feel free to use the chat. I have a chat window open. I can kind of keep track of anything that pops up there, but that would be just probably the easiest way to do it. And I don't mind being interrupted if the question is relevant to the topic of what we're doing. I'm pretty easygoing about that kind of stuff. So it makes sense that we'll talk about the question as it comes up. So, all right. So the mission behind the E-rate program and where this all started is basically it all derived from helping schools and libraries obtain high-speed, quality internet access, telecommunications at an affordable rate. As we know, that utility can be quite costly, quite expensive in some regions of our state. And so we want to make sure the Congress wanted to make sure that they had a program available to make that utility available to students and library patrons across the country. So basically what happened in basically 1996, the Congress basically rewrote the Internet Telecommunications Act with some more relevant language, because it had started back, and I think it was much earlier than that. The date is escaping me. So Congress rewrote it based upon the newer technology, newer availability of components and costs and infrastructure, and basically it put the FCC as the authority behind the act of that Congress wrote. And then the FCC then takes their orders, their direction, and gives it to USAC, and USAC basically is the managing entity of the program. USAC is who me as a state E-rate coordinator, you as applicants, consultants, et cetera, we all correspond and work with USAC with the program, and that is who manages the program ins and outs, et cetera. They have often meetings with the FCC for interpretation, processes, et cetera, to make sure that their check and balances are in order as well. So what does the USF bucket? And I apologize for the acronym, but it's basically USF is just Universal Service Fund. This is the fund that basically helps pay for E-rate in the E-rate program. This is just an example here on every one of our bills, whether it's our personal cell phone bill, the library's main phone bill, or your household or any kind of business. Every phone that's out there does have a universal service fund surcharge. And that little bit of money from every bill gets put into this bucket to be made available to the E-rate program as one of those. The 4 programs that the USF funds gets distributed from are these: schools and libraries, or the E-rate. That is obviously the one that we are working in, the most dear to our heart, because that's where our reimbursements come from for the internet connectivity. Rural health organization, low income, and then high cost are the other 3 programs that share in that funds that gets put into this bucket that the FCC oversees. So schools and libraries, those are the entities that are deemed educational organizations, and E-rate is basically, there is a cap on the E-rate fund, and it's at about $4.15 billion per year. That is available for all of the E-rate reimbursement opportunities available. The fund does not even come close to that as far as what is reimbursed, but that is kind of what the program caps it at, because they have to distribute that fund through all 4 programs, and the 4.15 is what is available and is capped in the E-rate program. So in order to get E-rate discounts, you have to have some form of eligibility. Okay, so every entity has to meet or satisfy all 4 of these criteria. Eligible entities, a school, public or private, K-12, and then a public library as well. That is an eligible entity. You must have an eligible purpose, education of these eligible students, or as a public standpoint, from a library standpoint, you are making education available to the general public. And then this eligible service, and we'll talk about more of what that eligible services are, but that is list of services that are eligible to receive reimbursement on. And then an eligible location, either it's on campus of a school, of any of the school locations, or the library campus. Only those locations are currently available for eligible services to be reimbursed on those sites. There's a big debate, big conversation right now about expanding that eligible location to the home, but that is still in conversation, and whether or not the E-rate program will help fund some of the at-home internet costs as well. So we'll see where that goes. All right, so first we'll talk about schools. So eligibility of schools, just real quick. So must provide an elementary or secondary education determined by state. So state of Idaho will determine, has approved such school as a state educational source, and then that is deemed an eligible entity by the state. Cannot have any kind of an endowment exceeding 50 million, and then cannot operate as, of course, a for-profit business on that. So those are from the school standpoint. Library, you must qualify and be established. Same process, but instead of with the State Department of Education, you're determined by the state, or the Library Services Technology Act by the state. And then your budget is separate from many of the schools, and we'll talk about a little bit of that as well. And then, of course, you can operate as a for-profit business as well. So another piece of it, eligibility. So non-instructional facilities, otherwise, as the acronym says, is our NIF. A lot of the E-rate terminology, that NIF is used very frequently. So a non-instructional facility, it can have eligible services delivered to them, some, not all. But these basically, the non-instructional are deemed a school building that does not have classrooms or instructions. For example, a bus barn, or in some cases where a school, you have it's strictly a district office and no educational services are done to students in that building. Those have to be kind of segmented out depending on the category of service and eligibility of service. And we'll talk a bit about that as well. So non-instructional facilities are eligible in some cases, but not all, for eligible services and reimbursement. And then, of course, library buildings that may not have access from the public standpoint. And you just have to determine what those pieces are by square footage if you do have some of those from a library standpoint. All right, so what does E-rate pay for? So each year the FCC approves a list of eligible services, and this list actually should be coming out to us any day now. We are waiting on this new list for the upcoming year. So the FY or funding year 2021, which is the school year that starts in July 1st of 2021. So this upcoming school year. So this list is due out to us at any time. We're not anticipating any major changes for the upcoming year than what we have this year. But the FCC does approve this eligible service list, and then it's released. It is posted, and basically that becomes your document of what services, products or services that are eligible for reimbursement to be filed on the E-rate applications for eligible entities. Okay. All right. So again, what does E-rate pay for? There's two categories of service that E-rate will reimburse. These categories are basically called Category 1 and Category 2. A Category 1 service is your broadband, your internet, your wide area network. That is your main source of internet connectivity that comes into the building to supply that internet connectivity, either for the library, a school, or even a school district. Okay. Now, in some cases where a school has multiple schools, they have a wide area network, that is still considered Category 1. Voice services used to be under Category 1, but they are no longer eligible. So they're not eligible for reimbursement, but that was also a Category 1 service as well. Category 2 services, if you think of it this way, is basically any of the networking services you have in your building or buildings. So for a library, for example, if you have Wi-Fi, cabling, a router, a switch, those eligible components, there's those costs that you have to purchase in order to display or offer up the internet service to multiple patrons or students in a school district. That is your internal network that is considered Category 2. Okay, so those are the two main categories. Simplified it pretty well, and that's the breakdown there. So make some examples of a Category 1 is how internet is delivered. There's many ways internet is delivered to a building. These are just a list of some of the examples depending on geographic location, infrastructure that is available in that location, different speeds that is needed by the entity, the library or the school district. So obviously, there's some of these have limitations of how much speed. Like, for example, DSL can only provide, a small amount of bandwidth. So some of the fiber-based or microwave-based services are a higher capacity for higher speeds, more people, etc. Okay. Then these are some examples of the category 2. So your internal, again, your internal infrastructure and your cabling, your wireless access points, switch routers, etc. Any repair services that you may need to have a third-party person or a consultant that is upkeeping the eligible hardware. So if you have a person that is managing your computers as well as your network, you have to segment those costs of this person coming in and doing the upkeep on the eligible hardware, the routers, the switches, et cetera, access points, as opposed to the computer repairs, et cetera, as an example, okay? So technical support, you can have, again, a third-party company, a person, consultant doing technical support, but it also has to be on the eligible equipment that is E-rate eligible. All right, before I get into the NSLP and stuff, any questions so far? Everybody doing okay? Just want to take a pulse.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Oh, you're right. Good. I'm assuming everybody can hear me and see me okay. So I didn't ask that earlier, but I'm assuming somebody would have yelled at me if I was, my lips were moving and no voice was coming out. So that's good.
Everything's good on my end.
Good. Thank you. I appreciate
you.
the feedback. All right. So how much do you get? It's basically determined by some level of economic status, poverty status. And what the E-rate program does is they use an already established program by the USDA. It is the National School Lunch Program, okay? This is not the only way to determine eligibility or determine your economic status, but it is the primary one. And we'll talk about that here and right now. So school or school district will use, if they participate in the National School Lunch Program, they will have a determination of factor of percentage of children, students that are qualified for that. And that percentage multiple or divided by the total number of students gives them a base number of NSLP discount. Okay, not the E-rate discount, and we'll talk about that as well, but it is a segment of their, basically their economic status of that location. The second way is by urban or rural status of the school district or the library system. Okay, so there's two factors, the NSLP discount and also urban and rural status of where those locations of those buildings are in. A library, obviously libraries don't have a lunch program, so they will use the school district that is in the geographic location of where the library is in the geographic location of that school district. Let me state that correctly. So if that library is in X school district ABC, then the library will use that discount for the NSLP percentage in order to get some sort of discount on that. So as I mentioned before, you have an established NSLP discount. So an economic determination of that entity, whether it's a school or a library. Let's say you have a 25% NSLP discount. As you can see on this chart, a 25% discount equates to either a 50 or a 60% E-rate discount. So the number on the right is your equivalent E-rate discount. So there's a multiplier built in. So it's not a one-to-one. If you have a 25% NSLP, doesn't mean you're going to have a 25% E-rate discount. There is the multiplier added to this, so you will have a higher discount. So, and then urban and rural, as you can see, there's a slight difference depending on if you're urban or a rural. Rural will typically get a little bit more of a discount based on, because rural or typically have a different economic determination as well. Okay. All right. So terminology here. So there's some things here that we want to talk about just from the E-rate world that may or may not make sense to a lot of folks, and just wanted to highlight some of the main ones. This is this is a point of confusion every year, and I just want to highlight it every year because it can be a bit confusing for a lot of folks, because we as a state employee, you as a library or school district employee as well, we all work in fiscal year. E-rate works what they call funding year. Of course, both are using the same acronym, FY. So some confusion there. So a funding year, the E-rate terminology, funding year, and on my slide says here, E-rate will use the first half of that year as the determination of value, the numeric value. So a funding year 2020 will start July of 2020 and end June 30th of 2021. So for example, we are currently in funding year 2020, but we are in fiscal year, not the same fiscal year, because fiscal year uses the second half of the year. So fiscal year 2020 starts on July 1st, 2019 and ends on June 30th, 2020. So as an example, we are in fiscal year 2021 because it uses the second half of the year to determine the numeric value. So just when you're talking to school board, other folks in your school library, just make sure you are using the correct fiscal year, because that's usually the year that you are focused in. This can definitely be a point of confusion because it's a different numeric year for funding year, an E-rate cycle. So, all right. These are the main forms that we all live and breathe and affiliate, associate, get frustrated with, confusion around, etc. in the E-rate program, okay? These are the main forms, and we'll talk about each one of these. So basically, from left to right on the slide is kind of how the sequential order of these go in. So you first start out with a 470, then you go to a 471, then you go to a 486, then later in the year, you go to either a 472 or a 474. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about those in a little bit more detail, but these are the main ones we deal with on an annual basis, and the numbers you need to be familiar with through the process. Okay, so what do each one of these forms do, and what do they mean? So the 470 basically is, it kicks off the competitive bidding process. You fill out a 470, you're essentially announcing to service providers that are eligible to participate in the program that you are seeking bids for such service. Such service, again, category 1, category 2, it doesn't matter, it's all encompassing. You need a 470 for all the services that you need to have or you're seeking bids on, okay? And there's some requirements around what the 470 needs to do, how long it needs to be posted, etc. The 471 is basically after you've done your competitive bidding, you've awarded to a service to a provider, you are basically telling USAC, this is who the provider that we've awarded. This is the service that we awarded them. This is the cost of the service that we have awarded them. And then such particulars of like how much bandwidth you're getting if it's category 1, or if it's category 2, these are the components, et cetera, et cetera. So all the details of what you've awarded basically goes on the 471, okay? And then that goes into a review process, and that's what USEC looks at in much scrutiny. They review the 471, and then they will send a notification to you whether or not you are approved or funded or not on the 471. Then on the 486, once you have received an approval on the 471, you will fill out a 486. Basically, a 486 is essentially saying, do your services start on July 1st? If they don't, you need to put that date. Now, if your services start just before July 1st, let's say the summer, like maybe say June, you still just put July 1st. And we'll talk about more about that. So you establish that the service start date is accurate. And then if you're SIPA compliant, SIPA compliance is a requirement to be part of the E-rate program. Means that you have a filtering aspect, security and filtering aspect on your network to provide that protection from your eligible students. Okay, you're in compliance there. 472, 474, these are the invoicing side or reimbursement side of the process. So if you're doing a 472, you are paying your bill. Let's say it's $1,000 a month for 12 months. So you have $12,000 pre-discount. And let's just say for easy math, you're a 50% discount. So half of that, you're filing a 472 to receive back from USAC that $6,000 that you are owed in terms of reimbursement. And then the service provider will go and file their form and get their portion of that as well. A 474 is on the service provider side. Now, if a entity, you have an agreement with the provider, and the provider will only invoice you your discounted portion. So back to my example of, let's say, $1,000 a month for 12 months, you're only going to pay, again, a 50% district, you will only pay $500 a month. So you don't have to go and get reimbursement because you're already paying your discounted portion, okay? So if you have an agreement with your provider to do a SPI invoice, a service provider invoice, then you don't have to go chase your reimbursement. You can just pay your discounted portion. Now, I did learn a couple years ago from the business managers meetings that depending on how your school district or library does your budget and how you do your finances, the money, depending on when you allocate and represent that dollar amount, is what billing cycle you want to go with. A lot of folks will recognize their reimbursement. They will put that into the next school year's budget. So it depends on how you do that. So just whatever fits your needs there. 498, this is a one and done. Don't have to do this one time unless your banking information changes. This is basically, you need to put your basically your direct deposit, your bank account number, a routing number, like a DUNS, like if you have a DUNS number, etc. You do fill this form out one time, and then USAC knows where do they direct deposit your reimbursements if you're doing a 472, okay? So they know instead of mailing you a check, they do a direct deposit, so it happens within days versus weeks, okay? So that's a rundown, just a quick rundown of the forms. These are, again, the major forms. The 498, you should only have to do that once unless it changes. If your banking information changes for whatever reason, then you'll need to do a new 498. But once you do it one time and it doesn't change, then you don't have to do it again. But these are the main forms that we live with through the E-rate program primarily. We all doing okay so far? All right.
Yep.
Sure am.
Okay, good. All right, so the FCC 471, so this is the filing window. So the filing, there's one major filing window, and that is usually a locked period of time, and that's the 471. So this is the big, the most important window in the program, because if you miss this window, you miss the opportunity for any reimbursements for the following school year, okay? Or fiscal year for that matter. So the 471 filing window, it generally opens middle of January and typically closes middle of March. So that's usually the time frame. We will know in advance, not very far in advance, so usually early January or maybe late December, depending on the FCC and different particulars that they're required to have done in a certain period of time. We will know that. And then I will then announce once I know the dates, I will announce that to everybody via my blog and make sure everybody's aware of when that filing window is. Okay. So anything filed outside of this window are not considered for funding. However, there is a small window, 2-week window after the 471 window closes. You can file what's called, let's say you missed it, like I had was this one gal up north. She was actually happened to be in Mexico in March. And so she missed the deadline, but she was back in time and I got her to file an out of window filing, but she has to also she files the 471 and the tag is out of window, but then she has to file a waiver with the FCC to get approval from the FCC that they're filing out of window. But that is basically a small 2-week window. So it's an additional step you have to do, but there is a small get out of jail free card that's given to everybody there, but just want to make you aware of that with additional steps, of course. All right. Identifying numbers. So every entity, whether it's school, whether it's a library, whether it's a school district, everybody is assigned an entity number. The primary entity number, or called a billed entity number, that is the primary entity that receives and pays all the bills. So for a school district, it's the district itself. If it's a school, if it's a library, single library, it's just that single library. If it's a library system, it's the main branch of that library system that has the billed entity number. Okay. So in the case of a school district, every school district will have a building entity or a child entity. So they often use a parent-child association to the structure of a school district, for example. So school district A has 3 schools. Each one of those schools are considered the child, and then the overall district itself is the parent. So that parent will get the billed entity number, and then the children of the school district will get the building entity number. And a library system is structured the very same way. If you're a single library, you just have a billed entity number, and no other building entity numbers are required or needed. Okay, so structured the same way. And the BEN, your billed entity number is your primary number that USAC uses, and that's all in your profile, et cetera, and they use that to track all of your information. Okay. As I was alluding to just a moment ago, so basically your individual school or school district, library branch, library system will all have those identifying numbers. If a library has a bookmobile, that would be considered a child of that library, and that is an eligible entity that would be considered as well and have its own number. A consortium, for example, so sometimes, not in Idaho, we don't have any consortiums in Idaho, but other states will have multiple school districts will join together to create a consortium. And then if there's libraries then in those regions, they can join the consortium as well. So it's actually taking the parent-child relationship in a much bigger sense to kind of leverage further discounts, et cetera. And then some states, they have educational service agencies. So, and if those are affiliated to the school district, then they will have an entity number as well. Okay. Service providers. So all service providers that are approved by USAC to participate in the E-rate program, they all receive what's called the Service Provider Identification Number, or SPIN. That is basically the equivalent of a billed entity number. Okay, so when they have to do if they go to USAC to get their invoicing or their reimbursement, they obviously they refer to as their SPIN number in there. And service providers may have more than one. There's many that do, and it depends on different aspects of how the company is structured and divided. Some will have, like, for example, a category 1 specific service aspect of their business, and another aspect will have category 2. So each will have a different SPIN number, as an example. Not all cases, but in some cases. Okay. So that's how the service provider side, that is how they break up their identifying numbers. So applying for discounts. So as I mentioned earlier, the 471 is the important form that we fill out. From a tracking standpoint, USAC will assign every service, every category of service, every service type, or if there's a service that has a different service provider, they will assign that particular service what's called a funding request number, or FRN, okay? You can have multiple FRNs on one 471. So if you have a 471 and it is for internet service, but for whatever reason, you need a different internet service for school A and a different internet service because of school B, because of geographic location or limitations or whatever the case may be, you may have 2 FRNs on one 471. And that is completely acceptable. That's not hard to do, because each service will have a different cost, for example, maybe different terms of length, and each one of those will receive a funding request number. And USAC will track, and they look at everything from an FRN standpoint. So if you get an FRN, if you get a funding request on a particular FRN, you have to then do a 486 on that FRN. So if you filed one 471, but 4 FRNs, you'll need to do 4 486s, or a 486 for each one of those. Again, a 486, don't let that scare you. A 486 takes 3, 4, or 5 minutes to do. It's super easy to do. But I'm just trying to explain, there is a requirement based on the FRN that you will have to do later down the road, because that's how they track it and separate it out. It makes it much easier when you have, because they used to track it by 471, and it was very confusing because those services may be slightly different. But now they do it by funding request number. It does make it easier, okay? All right, so this is just a general flow of a year in E-rate, okay? So as an example, starting in the upper left-hand corner, coming into the new school year, you're getting your feet on the ground in August. Come September, you may be starting to plan ahead for next year. You're thinking about the bidding process. So generally, I mean, these dates are general. Some of them more specific, but these are just kind of a general overview of the general dates. And then you update your entity profiles. So what USAC does, and this is in tomorrow's training program, we'll dive more about the admin window and what that means. But that is basically USAC saying, hey, entities, your profile is unlocked, make any changes, any updates, etc. So this is the opportunity to make those changes. And that is typically, again, October through January. And then you go through a bidding process. You fill out your 470, you're asking for bids, you're evaluating the bids, etc. Generally, August through January. That is kind of the time frame of when that occurs. A bid evaluation that technically should say August through January as well, depending on, because it follows the 470, and that is kind of the typical time frame. Sign your contract that you receive before you file your 471, and then you wait till the window opens. You file the 471, again, January through March. USAC reviews those applications that gets filed. You typically receive a funding commitment decision on those FRNs. Typically, January is a little aggressive, but it's usually March to, in some cases, we still have FRNs from some folks in the state that haven't been approved yet. So it's March through December, I guess, technically speaking. So, and then 486, you fill that out once you get your funding commitment on that FRN, and then you purchase the services or equipment, pay the service provider, and then at the end of the school year or the fiscal year, you want to file for your reimbursement if you're filing a 472. So it's just kind of a quick year and a glance flow chart that gives you some ideas of what comes first, what comes next, and then it's basically wash, rinse, repeat, essentially. So hopefully that helps. All right, so I'm going to touch a little bit about the E-Rate Productivity Center. I'm not going to go into too detailed. We'll do that tomorrow. I'll show you some more details of it, but just to kind of touch on this a little bit, if you haven't already gone into the to EPC, this is kind of just a quick little overview. So you go to USAC's homepage and you have two ways to sign in. I circled them both there. Just basically sign in. They both take you to the same location. Okay. And you sign in, and then basically that is your profile. Okay. And again, I won't go into too much detail as far as that process. That's more on tomorrow. This is, again, just a quick overview. EPC, or E-Rate Productivity Center, or EPIC, those three terms are used, is basically your account and application management portal. Is where all your information of your entity is located. Okay, so you manage the program, you receive notifications, you do appeals, create a customer service case, etc. You use EPIC for all of that. As I said, just basically the primary things that you do in EPIC, once you have a base profile, which USAC helps you create that profile initially, as far as if you have multiple entities in your profile, they help you create those, and then they give you that profile access to the profile. And then from there, you just make some minor modifications. So you can you create your forms, make your forms, maintain your list of your entities, your student population, your users and their permissions for such users. In some cases, some people have multiple users that have access to EPIC, and they'll have different roles. But in most cases, it's just usually one person, and they're the account administrator, and they have full access. That's typically the case. So, but those options are available. So once you've logged in, again, I've skipped through the login process. Again, we'll touch more about that detail, but once you log in, this is just kind of a general, this is your home page, and this is just my training site. So yours will look slightly different, but generally the different things will be the same. So in the upper right-hand corner, as I show here, you have all the options to do the forms, to manage your organization, to do service substitutions if your service has to change, or if you've selected the service provider has changed their SPIN number, you need to do a SPIN change, etc. So that is where most of your forms or links to do those type of processes are located on your landing page. And then the top one there is new. The pending inquiries, that's actually a new option that they've provided just recently. It's pending inquiries. So you may have something on a 486 or a Form 500 or an appeal or a case or something to that matter. That is a drop down, quick and easy place to look at it and what the status is, etc. Different notifications that you may receive. You need to find out, did I get a funding commitment on this certain FRN? You go here, you drop down to funding commitment decisions, what funding year that they were in, and then they'll give you a list. So it's a quick and easy way to sort through. If you have many notifications through many years, that is where you want to do a quick little search, okay? And then my entities, if you have multiple entities, you'll have them listed here. If it's just a one entity, like for a library or just for one school, that one school will be listed there, as well as on the upper right, upper left, you'll see Welcome School District 26. That is just basically the name of your entity as well, okay? So just a quick little look there. And then the second half of that page, if you scroll down from the page before, obviously I can't give you that in a screenshot program, you have a way and an ability to look and research and find out more details of your forms that you filed, your 470, 471, 486, etc., and the status of those forms. Sometimes they're not certified. They'll show as incomplete. You want to see that, and then you want to obviously complete them, because if you may have been sidetracked and needed to come back to it, you can come back to it that way. Okay, so it's an easy way to find out what the status of those forms are very easily and quickly from your landing page. So where can you get help? So these are the different things that you have access to. Get to know your state E-rate coordinator. Hi, that's me. And there's ways, many folks call me directly, whatever the case may be. I'm happy to help in any time of year for any aspect of the program. USAC has what's called a Client Service Bureau. Now, there are some things I can't do. There's some things you can't do, like in your profile. And the Client Service Bureau they have to do that for you. I can guide you through that and what questions to ask, things to pay attention to, what they should or shouldn't say, etc., before you call them. So I can help you through that as well. But they're the main tech support or customer service aspect of USAC, okay? And that is their number. So write that number down, have that handy somewhere, because you will have to call them at some point in the process for some reason, okay? Here's USAC's URL for their website. Many resources, many tools there. I can help you through some of those things if you need help through that. USAC does have what's called a weekly news brief. They have some good information.
As soon as he comes back.
There he is.
I'm not sure what happened there.
I'm
not sure where I was.
through you.
Was I on this slide? Am I muted? No, I'm not muted.
You're back
You're
now.
back.
Okay.
You held us in serious suspense there for a minute.
Apparently.
It was thrilling.
Yes.
Everything went blank on my end. Was I on this slide? Can you see my screen still?
Nope.
Okay. All right. That's awesome. All right. Let's try this again. So can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
And was I here when I disappeared? Okay. Perfect.
Yes.
All right. Phew. Well, I'm glad we'll technology. It's finest. That's for sure. Anyway, so I'm not sure where I was when this process before I disappeared, but these are the basically help scenarios for that you have available. USAC does have the news brief, it comes in handy. Sometimes it's pretty detailed, but I will, if you sign up for my blog, and there's the link here, you'll see this little picture followed by email on the right-hand side. You have to scroll down just a little bit. If you sign up for my blog, you will get an email directly in your inbox when I make changes, when I post something. And it may or may not be relevant to you, but it's E-Rate Idaho, all E-Rate Idaho stuff. So it may just be specific to specific applications that got funded, or something like the 471 window, here's the dates. So announcements and deadlines and stuff like that. So I do encourage you to sign up for that. It's very easy, comes to you, so you don't have to go search for it, etc. Okay. All right. So one of the other important aspects of participating in the E-Rate program is then you automatically, if you do an effort to participate in the E-Rate program for E-Rate reimbursement, you then qualify for state reimbursement. Dan, who is on here, who you spoke to just a moment ago because I disappeared, he is the one that manages the state portion, the state reimbursement of those non-discounted portions. So in the example I used earlier, if you're a 50% district and you're paying $12,000 a year, and then you get $6,000 back from USAC, then you work with Dan, and we have us all on record, and he asks you for a couple different things throughout the year, and you will get the other $6,000 emailed or direct deposited to you as well. So obviously can be a huge cost benefit to your bottom line of your accounting financial purposes. So repurpose that elsewhere, or however you guys need to do that. But it is a big advantage to have both sides covered for the category 1. Does not include category 2, just category 1 for your internet and WAN on that. Dan, I don't know if you want to, since you're on, if there's something if you haven't gotten an email from Dan already, then maybe he doesn't have you, but you should have received an email from him. But anyway, I'll let him say some things if he likes.
Thanks, Todd. I work pretty closely with Todd, and so if I can also answer some basic E-rate questions if Todd's not available and need a quick answer. But yes, my program reimburses the non-E-rated portion, and not only that, but I also manage a infrastructure grant that will cover up to 10% of a special construction project if it's filed through E-rate through the 470 process, as Todd reviewed. And you can ask me more about that if you're interested in pursuing funding for a big special construction project. Please let us know, and we would love to help shepherd that process along the way. I got a question here in the chat from Candy. She asks, I sent my invoices to Daniel already, thank you, but do I need to tell him that my vendor is billing me the discounted rate so he knows how much to reimburse my school? That's a great question. You do not need to tell me if you file for the BEAR or the SPY form, whether or not it's discounted. It's a discounted bill when you get it, or if it's the full amount when you receive it. I have a massive spreadsheet where I'm actually collecting and analyzing all of 470 and 471 data as it's coming in throughout the year. So by the time I get your invoices, I'm expecting it to be either the full amount or 30% of that amount. And a lot of vendors will note that on their amount, or that a lot of vendors will note that on their invoice. So I have enough tools to make that determination myself, and I'll always reach out if I have a question about a specific bill or portion. If I can't crack the nut, I will reach out and ask for help figuring it out. You're welcome.
Yeah, from Daniel's perspective, it doesn't really matter if you're doing a BEAR or SPY, because that portion is the same. And we typically we may not see whether or not if it's a BEAR or SPY, because it doesn't trigger in the system until something is drawn on that FRN. If a service provider draws from it, then the system then triggers out, says it's a SPY. So, but like Daniel said, it doesn't really matter to him. It's good to have on record as a documentation piece, but his portion is still the same that he has to manage and then send to you. So great question, Candy.
I'll answer, or I don't have another question to answer, but as Todd mentioned, I've most likely emailed you in the last couple of weeks or in the last 2 weeks asking for your first half of the year invoices. If you did not receive an email, please contact me at the email provided in the slide. When it's time for me to reimburse, I try to get them out before Christmas and then before the end of the fiscal year, or whenever summer break usually starts in June. I will ask for the first 5 invoices out of that 6-month first half of the year. So from July through November, and most likely all of the bills that you get for the internet category 1 services are all going to be the same flat fee without any variances. So therefore I can look at the first 5 and say, oh, they're all the same amount. I will project that they're getting billed that amount next month, and then I can reimburse you for 6 months at a time. If there is enough variance for whatever reason between each bill, then I'll ask you to send me your December when you receive it. But that is pretty rare. Thankfully, internet billing is generally made pretty simple thanks to USAC's E-rate funding structure and needing to get those amounts exact.
Great.
And I think that's all I have, but I'm also happy to answer any other questions while I'm here.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Todd.
Yeah. So questions that you guys may have that's outstanding that you haven't asked before or thought of or whatever the case may be. And if you guys don't have any questions and something you think about later, of course, as you know, I'm always available for email and phone call, etc. Oops, let me go back.
It was very informative, and thank you very much. I got to run to another meeting, but I'll be back tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And then here is my contact information if you guys don't already have it. And then again, my blog address as well on there. I was trying to put that URL for a just an evaluation of the session in the chat. Let me do that real quick. So you have that. So if you wouldn't mind taking a minute, I just have a few questions on there. Just anything you might want to add, something that I did not present that you were looking for, or whatever the case may be. Your feedback is definitely of value to me. So I just want to make sure that you guys are getting the services and support that you need in this program. So, but yeah, no, you're more than welcome. So thank you very much. I'll stay on for a minute, but if you have, there's nothing else, you guys are feel free to get about your day. So I appreciate you guys joining in.